All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and unpredictably touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I'm Sasha Wolf, here virtually as usual with my friend and producer of extraordinary dimension, proportion.
Wow.
He's giggling. Yay! Michael Chauvin-Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Sasha. Yes, that was quite the introduction.
Ta-da! How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're recording. We always record the intros, like, I don't know, anywhere from 4 to 7 days after we record my main episode interview. Between the time that I interviewed this week's guest, the photographer Todd Hido, which was a wonderful conversation. We'll get to that in a second. And today we, feel very blubbery. Yes. We lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg a few days ago and still just feels extremely emotional. And I know you and I were, both feeling quite down in the dumps. So it's hard to be too peppy.
It is. Justice Ginsburg passing away alone would have been a time for incredible reflection and appreciation of, the life she led and how she served this country. But it's also mixed in with this heated and unjust, political environment where we are now looking at this administration selecting yet another Supreme Court justice. I'm Jewish, but I'm not at all religious. That's putting it mildly. I wasn't raised with any religion at all. And but also Justice Ginsburg dying on Rosh Hashanah. I mean, even to me, there was something just incredibly powerful and moving about that. And and then not even letting that just be for a few days, like, having the statements come out right away about replacing her, like, the night she died. I mean, it's just like, it's just so ugly. And I feel like the power of the ugliness is so intense that it's even, like, reaching all of us. Like, I feel coded in it, which is just an awful feeling. But got to find hope. Got to find our hope. Yeah, and maybe that's a little segue to this episode, because there are things that Todd says in this episode that I find very hopeful as being an artist, including one. I'll give just one quote. You'll have to listen to the episode for the rest of them, but it's hard enough to be an artist, let alone always know what you are doing. And I just love that idea, because you and he talk about not always, knowing if the work you're doing is good or if the work you're doing is going to amount to anything, and leaving the analysis part of it aside for later so that it doesn't get in the way of you actually getting the work done. And I found that very helpful.
Yeah, he talks about piles, right? Like
yes.
Piles of photographs.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful way to work, because it's taking some of that pressure off of you to think that you have to have this sort of beginning and end all at once.
Right.
And so he adds to different bodies of work and doesn't worry how old something might be or recent something might be when it comes time to, picking that work and putting it all together. It's such a good way to do it.
Yeah. No, it's really lovely. Yeah, he was filled with, I felt like he was just like a fountain of information.
Oh, absolutely. You have a great conversation about the cinematic quality of his
that
work.
Was fun.
And of course, your movie background, your film background, and you find some common ground in terms of cinema influence.
Yeah, he says he doesn't know that much about, like he hasn't seen that many movies, and then somehow pulls like all this obscure stuff out of his hat. And, I mentioned one of my favorite filmmakers, and he's like, oh yeah, I love that work. Anyway,
you break into art house films.
Yeah. Yeah, no, It's a really lively conversation. Also, Todd is a jaunty speaker, and I think it just keeps things moving really fast, even though it's also just like information, wisdom. So anyway, I loved talking with him. I was really happy that I spoke to him before bad political stuff, because I was in a very good mood when I talked to him, and then 2 days later I was extremely weepy.
That's right.
But
That's
it was
right. So when you listen to this, maybe it'll also be a little distraction for you, put you in a little better mood for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself like just so, that's my life now, as I'm sure it is for so many other people. Like I feel almost like I have a little bit of personality disorder. Like my moods just go up, down, up, down, up, down. I try and keep them a little bit more even, but it's tough. But anyway, doing the podcast has been really wonderful. I just also want to say I'm hearing from a lot of people about how they feel about the podcast. Keep that up. You can email me directly. Feel free. Oh, yeah. If you want to say something nice.
Yes. In fact, please
you can always
send Sasha some nice emails.
Email to me. It's just Sasha@SashaWolf.com, or, Sasha Wolf Projects on Instagram. You can message me. But when I get those messages and how you have enjoyed listening to the podcast and what it's meant to you folks, it's a very moving experience for me. So I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm really appreciative of those messages.
Yeah. I just want to say one final note about this episode, in that if you're an art educator or an art student, I found also the things in this episode really resonated with me as an art educator and a former art student. So
yeah, definitely. Well, he is a teacher, and so a lot of that teaching skill comes out in the episode. Anyway, it's a little bit longer. We do try and keep these under an hour. This may go a little bit over. We'll see. But why don't we end our wrap here? And if you don't mind, Michael, take it away.
Yes, absolutely. Here is your conversation with Todd Hido.
Todd Hido, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. I can't believe I nabbed you. I feel very just thrilled to be talking with you. So thank you so much for...
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being interested in my work and talking to me.
Oh my gosh, of course. So I love your work. I'm a fan, first and foremost.
Thank you.
And there's so much. It's like I've spent the past couple of weeks since I knew we were going to talk, just really digging into your pictures and listening to some interviews you've given before. And I think one of the things I really, really enjoyed that I didn't have, but I got, was Aperture has done this wonderful series of books called the Photography Workshop Series, and you did one.
Yes.
And they're like these just, I have to say, your issue, the book you did, is basically a teaching tool. I mean, it just blew me away. Like, you're so generous in the book with your wisdom. Every page is just filled with, like, I was just underlining things. I was like, people don't even, like, just read the book and you'll learn so much. So that was just such a fun experience for me. And I couldn't recommend it enough. Did you have fun doing it?
It was great fun to do it. It was actually, it had originated out of actually a photo workshop I did there. And we had my editor, Denise Wolf. She recorded this 2-day workshop, and so it's kind of you can understand how it would be like a teaching tool, because it was sort of based off of the bones of a workshop, and then
I did not know that. That's awesome.
And what was interesting is she's really helped me edit down, because it was 14 hours of talking, and somebody actually transcribed it. I couldn't believe it. And a professional did that. And then she started going through the text, and then started helping me put together certain topics. And then we just kind of whittled it down to what this book is, which is, a very readable, 127 pages. And I am proud of this book, and I also really wanted to have a book that was, under $30, that had a lot of pictures in it and information. And because I really like that, it's affordable, and that's great.
Yeah.
I love working with Aperture for that reason, because there's that kind of distribution and affordability.
Yes,
It's really,
yeah.
I think it's a service to like the photo community.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. I'm a huge fan of Aperture. And Denise, who I know pretty well and who, aside from being quite fond of Denise, also know her to be an incredible editor. And she also did the book that you did with Aperture, Intimate Distance, which
Yes.
is sort of almost a retrospective book. She edited that with you.
Exactly. And so we had done the workshop book, and got to know each other, and we had similar ideas and about books and stuff. And then she was when we were finishing that up, she said, "I have your mid-career survey, if you want to do it, and so I was like, okay, let's one thing leads to another, which is really nice about working with publishers sometimes, is that they when you find somebody that you work well with, it's really nice to work with them more. So I feel really lucky about that.
And I would think also, particularly with a sort of retrospective book, because it's not like you're just handing a publisher, like your first book, House Hunting, is really tight. It's one body of work. It's not that there's not a ton to do in terms of sequencing, editing and sequencing, but I would think you'd really have to have a very special relationship with someone to collaborate and trust them on something that has a much larger scope, like Intimate Distance.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing that's interesting is, like, for me, I like all the books I've made prior to this. Everything I've done with Nazraeli Press, which is my publisher for most of my monographs, is that I do the editing and the sequencing, and that's something that and I have the total input on that. And then, and it was really different working with Aperture, and then where there was there's a whole entire staff of people that make those books. And I found that, I had to get used to that a little bit because, but I also knew well enough and thought, very highly of Denise's ability to edit, is that, and then also because she made this workshop book, she was knew everything about my work, and
right.
and she's a steel trap for that stuff. And so she just, it was natural. And then we had, one of us had come up with the idea that we would do it chronologically, because we were trying to figure out how do you sort the pictures and not have them look like, my other books, which often have a mixture of portraits, landscapes, like night shots and things like that in them. If there had to be some kind of a form to it, and so the chronological is how it was laid out, and then it just made all the sense in the world. Then once we did it that way, it just kind of, because it laid itself out basically. And then if you didn't like the way pictures came together, and there was something in between them that wasn't quite right, you could just pull that picture, or maybe it was redundant, or whatnot. But the thing I like about that book is you see how an artist, like for me, I always love looking at the process of another artist. I go to lectures all the time. I'm constantly interested in learning more. And so when I made that book, I definitely wanted it to be, to show the actual, how I worked. And I'll never forget the first time, this is 20 years ago, when I had scanned my pictures into my prints into my computer, and all my photographs are chronologically numbered, because that's how I just did my roll of film, and way back from when I lived in Boston, till now, and so there's a chronological number, so the pictures just dropped into place, and all of a sudden I looked at this folder, and I'm like, wow, that's my whole entire career in order. And it was such a trip. I mean, now it's the pictures do that. I mean, they sort themselves, but the first time that was done, I was like, that is fascinating to see how you think, and what you hover on for a while, or also how sporadic you are as an artist. And, and then you have times that you're completely focused on something. And then there's times where you're sort of searching, or trying out new things. And it's just kind of, sorting your pictures in a chronological way, for anybody, is a fascinating thing to do, because it's it's what you are, it's kind of the inside of your mind in a way, and you don't often get to look at those things in chronological order.
Well, let me ask you, because this sort of connects to something else I was really interested in. When you do a book like this, it's very different than sort of completing a body of work and then publishing the book, completing a body of work and then publishing the book. There's sort of more of a connection between when you made the pictures and when you're publishing the book. And I want to just quote, David Campany wrote the intro to this book. And he said something I want to ask you about. He said, "There's great value in looking back and risk too. Photographers know this better than most. Can Hido really know who he was when he made an image 25 years ago or even last year? Which is the best moment to be making that call?" And I think I wrote to you that I loved that and wrote that I thought this was sort of almost a mindfuck sort of concept. And, I'm just really interested in how, I mean, you just talked about it a little bit, but what is it like to be almost reinterpreting, because you can't possibly, you're not the same person. Look, we're not the same person we were yesterday, but let alone when so many years have passed, and your experience of the pictures must be so different. So,
in a weird way, in a strange way, it's except for I've, it's good to know a little of my history. It's I grew up in Ohio, and then I moved to Pittsburgh and Boston, and I went to school there, and then that's one part of my life, the East Coast part. And then when I moved here, there's the West Coast part. And that's when I moved here is when things really started to click for me, because I was, it's 25, and, as you get older, you get more wise and all that, and your life kind of comes together in hopefully a better way.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And it could be.
That's the plan.
And then, but so I feel like the pictures I made when I lived on the East Coast, a lot of times you're also very much a product of your environment in a lot of ways. But I remember, I went to the Boston Museum School for my undergrad, and every one of my teachers had either studied with Aaron Siskin or Harry Callahan. Every one of them. This was and the pictures I made back then were 8x10 was big for me. I was making 5x6 inch prints, or small 8 by it wasn't. I didn't make anything large. It was all black and white. And then I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I ended up, going several years later, went to the California College of Arts and Crafts, is what they used to call it.
Yep.
And it really was. And I studied with Larry Sultan. And so that and then when I came here, I remember my work changed very much, and I changed a lot too. I started doing color. I figured out what my work was. In the past, when I lived in Boston, I basically, the person that I thought was the greatest was Emmett Gowan, and I still love his work, and he's very near and dear to me, his work in particular, but my work reflected that, very much when I was younger. And then when I came here, I think I figured out a lot more about who I was, and what things were in my life that were, what's behind my artwork. And actually, one of the things that sort of, was fascinating was, we had as a grad student, we had these independent studies with people, and they didn't have to go to your school. They were often better off to be another faculty somewhere else, or just somebody else in the photo world. And I remember there was a friend of mine who was she went to therapy a lot, and she told me about this art therapist that she worked with, and she's like, "This is incredible. You have to do it." And I could have never afforded anything like that. So I had this idea that, well, maybe I can do an independent study with this person, and if he's into it, we can meet a few times and talk about my pictures instead of making collages from National Geographic like my friend had done. But and he was really into that because he was an art therapist, and I was a young artist, and it was really amazing what happened in that whole situation, because I basically, he pointed out to me that I was making the work I was supposed to be making, and that and that some of my my childhood for sure, but some of my issues in my life were in my photographs, and that was something that's always been a curious thing to me, that that's how like, and it was interesting because I felt like I was really interested in that. And I was just felt very, because as a young artist, like, I mean, a lot of people, like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know, like, is this good? Is it not good? And then like, but, I sort of had this person who was sort of like, I respected, like, the saying, like, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and that was really that was really great. Cause I kind of remember just kind of thinking like, yeah, I am. And I should just keep doing that,
liberating.
and it was kind of liberating because I didn't have the, like, the undecisiveness of, figuring things out. I just sort of was doing it. And so I've sort of like always done that. And I don't know if I even answered your question, but
no, it's fine.
Did you know? How do you know who you were and who you're? And then, and what's the best time to like to make decisions or edit your work or whatever? Personally, I think that I've always looked back when I shoot. I'm just sort of adding to like piles of pictures, and I have like piles of houses, and I have piles of apartments, and I have piles of portraits, and I have piles of landscapes, and I have, like different piles, interiors. And I sort of like feel like I'm adding to those stacks. And I've always kind of liberally pulled from a stack and not worrying about, well, I made that 10 years ago, right. Because that's not the kind of photographer I am. Like, I'm sort of like piecing together, like, something. And then, as long as I made it, it doesn't matter when I made it. And of course, I wouldn't like put together like a black and white picture I did when I was, in my Boston phase of myself. And then it wouldn't necessarily go with something I did, like last week. But sometimes it's interesting that the roots of what you did, what I did last week started 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's something that I find to be, I like that. The cycle of process of an artist is really it's inherently fascinating to me.
You were just sort of touching on something that is really near and dear to my heart, which is this idea that I'll sort of phrase it in a slightly different way, if you don't mind. But I always say to young artists that you have to be open to the idea that what you love is not going to be what you make. So in other words, when I was young, I made films, narrative films, and the type of films I loved were not the type of films that I wrote. I mean, it just wasn't what came out of me. Right. And I had to come to terms with the fact that, my inner voice was just not in alignment with John Cassavetes. So I was just not, that's not the type of that sort of like uber late 60s, 70s, realist type of filmmaking was not the type of things that came out of me when I wrote. And I had to come to terms with that. And it sounds a little bit like you went through something like that. But I do always say that to young people, like, be really open to who you actually are, not just who you want to be.
Yes, yes.
They don't always line up.
Yeah.
And then love who you are, of course. Then be proud of like the type of work you are making. And yeah.
It's true. I mean, I think that like, I can't imagine like, I'm very, very, very picky and hard on myself. But I also I like the things that I've put out in the world, like I love them, otherwise I wouldn't have put it out in the world. I enjoy my work, and otherwise I wouldn't.
That's so great.
I'd be bummed if I didn't, and actually, and then when I don't, I am really bummed. That's something that like, I feel, everybody's had this experience of like, you go out and take pictures and they're like, oh, I didn't get anything, or like, I didn't get one, or whatever. And it's, that's always disappointing, and that happens, for everybody. And, but anyway, it's interesting. I think it's great to like, I think you need to like what you do.
Yeah, well, it definitely helps.
Yes.
You quote someone in the workshop series, Sister Coretta Kent, and this is such a fantastic concept, and I get the sense that this has just really, really worked for you. Like, and the quote is, "Find a place you trust, and then try trusting it for a while." I love that so much. Can you talk about that a bit?
And that comes from, I don't know. I think I think John Cage found it and got it from Sister Coretta Kent. But, if you look at, if on the internet, like John Cage rules for students and teachers, this is what comes up. And
that's awesome.
And so this is where I mean, like, rule number one, find a place you trust and then try trusting it for a while, and so I think that's really, that's kind of what we're just talking about,
Right.
You find what you kind of want to do. And then instead of trying to like just move on all the time, like that's one thing I think about, like if there's any photography students listening, like, like a good body of work takes like 2 to 3 to 5 years to make, and then sometimes longer than that. And, and then people always move on in like semesters, Yep. Like in school always sometimes would drive me nuts because like, it's like everyone's trying to like change everything in 3 months, because they're in a different class or whatever. It's like, I've always, and whenever I would teach, I always tell students like, it's your job to bend and manipulate, my assignment or whatever I'm asking you to do to fit your work and your world, and that's how, because, you shouldn't be, it's good you're experimenting now, but also like you should be trying to figure out what it is your thing is, and just kind of working and doing is, what becomes your thing. But like they say, if you move on quickly, or if don't trust it for a while, you won't get to that sort of next place, whatever that is.
And did that happen to you, like when you started photographing houses at night? Was that
that was one of the things. And then sort of what I was saying like earlier about the art, like I think about like I'm making this archive of images or stacks of pictures that I can pull from. Like I would shoot, like how my houses at night started is I went out. There was an assignment I had for this Larry Salton class, and Lynn Kirby, who was a filmmaker, they did it together. It's called the Narrative Workshop. And we were just sort of like putting picture narratives together. I had, strung together some found photographs, and I needed a place for these people's like world that I had created through sequencing to exist in. And so I photographed a house at night.
Is this the alter ego assignment?
No, it's not that one. This one was a narrative. It was a narrative one.
Okay.
But this was basically like I just needed to go, and I just needed like a container for people's lives to be in. So I shot a house, and it worked. And then I kind of used it for that purpose, and then I moved on, to something else, and then I was out again looking around at night, and as it happens in the wintertime, it gets dark before you know it, and then you're out shooting at night. And so like I found this neighborhood that was not far from where I lived. That was like really foggy at night, but it had this it was East Coast looking, which was strange because it was like, like there's Levittown, New York, which is the first suburb. Like the Levitt brothers built this neighborhood in California, like in Pacifica, which is it's so strange to see like this East Coast. Like I've been to Levittown, New York, and it looks exactly like Levittown, not Levittown, California, but it's Pacifica, California. But it's like, it's the weirdest like juxtaposition because it's like this foggy, spooky, marine layer, out of place, like social real. And I remember I found that and I was like, wow, this is something else here. And then I just started taking pictures, and then I made, I was in a neighborhood, so there were houses. And then, I kept, going back, and I kept making one, another one, and another one, and I would make things in between. But like, I just sort of slowly added to it. And then, when I had like, a handful of them, all of a sudden it's like, this is something that I should keep doing. And it was something that I focused on, a little bit more intensely. And then, but all the while still doing other things at the same time. So that's how I kind of work. I don't usually get an idea and then illustrate it. Like I usually I'm on to something and I keep making pictures, but then I'll, and then I'll just keep going. But then you figure out what it is later. And I always give myself that permission. Like I don't need to, it's hard enough to be an artist, but if you like have these like, conditions on yourself, like I need to know what I'm doing. And like, I need to like, I need to perform every time I get my camera out, and like, that's just impossible, to do. And so like,
well, that actually, there's another quote that you have in the book, in the workshop series book, that I think is what you're saying. It's that Joan Didion quote: I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear.
Exactly. Precisely. And that is like it's so well, that's so well written. Of course, it's Joan Didion, but like,
it gave me goosebumps actually.
yeah, it's amazing, right? I mean, like
absolutely.
you just make stuff, and you find out, what you're thinking about, and or what's important to you, and or what you're having a problem with, often. And I think that like that's the beauty about art is like it's of such value to yourself. For me, the best way to do it is to just naturally gravitate towards what it is I'm thinking about or working with or whatever it might be, and then let that just lead and not question it, just sort of like, because of course that's the other thing about photography is like you can make tons of pictures and you don't have to show, but you end up showing like 5% of them if you're even lucky. I actually think I did like somebody added up my ratio, like it was 0.5% was like my rate of like, cause I had like, 10,000 rolls of film or something. And then and I had like 500 good pictures at that point. And I think that's what the math is on that. It's a very low number. It's not even as good as a polar bear striking their target 2% of the time. That's an odd fact. A polar bear, I heard that 2% when they strike, they only hit 2% of the time. Isn't that crazy?
Well, one thing I really like about animals, and I always say this about dogs because everyone knows I love dogs. I always have dogs. And I think animals, unlike people, are always hopeful. I'm a big believer in hope. I mean, you just always have to have hope or you're sort of doomed. Hope is like just this thing of grace that you just, and I love that about animals. You see it all the time. I was up in Woodstock the past few weeks and I've been going back and forth a lot. And my Peanut's my dog, and she will chase every single animal in the woods, and she never catches anything, but she always thinks she's going to.
Right, that's awesome.
She starts out, the chase starts out, she's so hopeful. And you know what? She's never even disappointed. I mean, she's just like, okay, there'll be another one in 3 seconds.
Right. That's amazing. That's a beautiful spirit. And like,
it's a good attitude.
It really is. It's amazing. Yeah.
I try and learn from her.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. That's a great lesson actually, because you almost got to be like that as a photographer. You'll catch something at some point, hopefully, but like, there's also, and that's the other thing about it. Like, I'm a naturally inclined wanderer. I just I love just driving around and walking around and like just looking at the world and like I love that and I'll never stop doing that, because it's just like
that's a great
it's
quality.
Just really fun to do, it's like it's so exciting.
You've also said that, and I think this is just right in keeping with hope and what we're talking about, you've also said there are a million ways to talk yourself out of making your work and saying to yourself that it's already been done.
Yes.
But not everything has been done before, so just go do your work and see where it leads. So that's that's really hopeful too, and really, I think, a great lesson.
I really think that people overthink things a lot.
Me
too. Not just in photography, but life in general. But like photography, it's like, you kind of have to and the other part of this this rules for students and teachers is everything's an experiment. Don't analyze and make at the same time. They're different processes. And I think that's really, I try to listen to that because, you can very easily, like when you're out in the world looking for photographs, you basically, there's sometimes you're just like, do I take a picture of that? Or like, is that what I want? And then, like you just got to try it and see what happens.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And there's so many times that you catch yourself not pulling up your camera and photographing something, and then, or in my case, like, getting out and taking up, getting the tripod out and doing it at night. Like, there's a high bar that I've set for my own self, but I also have to tell myself like, hey, dummy, you got all these pictures because you just did it.
Yep.
And so go and do it, just take the picture, and I've been doing this for a long, long time. And I tell myself that when I'm not feeling like, setting up my tripod and all that.
Do you have a sense, and if you do, do you have idea of when this happened, but do you have a sense of yourself as being very successful? I mean, because obviously, by any objective measure, I think you are very successful. Really respected, really renowned, really widely collected institutionally, privately. Like, you must realize that.
Yeah, I do. I do realize that, and I feel really lucky that that's what happened with my work. But at the same time, I also, and this is a lesson that I learned from when I was a teenager. I used to race BMX bikes, and I was actually the state champ of Ohio of like 4 years. And I actually I got to ride with a number 1 plate on my bike, which was kind of amazing. But I realized when I was kind of coming up in that sport, I realized that I would watch these kids that they would win the number 1 plate, and then the next year they would just suck. They just lost it. They lost their focus. They lost their, they let up, because they had arrived. And that's with a teenager, it's somehow or another, I don't know how I had the wisdom to be that's actually wrong. And you need to ride harder and ride faster, And so I remember that lesson, from, being, I guess you could call us successful in biking. But I think that for myself, I feel really lucky, but I also have worked really hard, and I never would have imagined when I was, a student, I'd be talking to somebody like yourself and I talking about all these books that I had done. And, I might have thought that I would have been lucky to have 1 book I just turned 52. And by the way, it's a mid-career survey, not a retrospective.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm not done yet,
No, you're not.
Yeah. That was always a joke with us, I'm too young for a retrospective.
But you also, Todd, I'm not saying anything that you haven't said many times before, so I hope this is okay. But you had a challenging childhood, and I do think that a lot of people who have tough childhoods are just in general less entitled and sort of know they have to just keep working for things.
Yes.
So I do think that can be an offshoot of difficulty. It gives you another gift, which is the gift to know you have to work for everything.
Yes, or
really.
you have drive, then, or maybe you're, maybe somewhere way deep inside yourself, you're trying to prove something to somebody that might have put you down. And I think that I think there's definitely a part of that in my life. I would still do what I'm doing, if I could afford it, if I was not successful. But I feel really lucky that I'm doing that thing I want, and it worked, and whatever that means. And but I still I'm hard at work on my next things, and I'm constantly thinking and moving with my work, which is fun because it's what makes me happy. What makes me it gives me that sanity in life. I feel like if I didn't make stuff, I would be a whole nother person. Something about making things is very important, and I don't feel right when I'm not making stuff.
One observation I wonder if we could talk about a little bit about your work that I have is all the work that you've done, almost to a picture, I feel has such an intense sense of my space. And when I say my space, I mean you, Todd. My space, your space. The space of you, the photographer, and the space that you're looking at. So the opposite of that would be sort of like a Winogrand or certain Friedlander work, certain street or road photographers who you often feel are very sort of in the mix, they're in it, they're in the crowd.
Yeah, right, right.
But with your work, for me, it's there's this really intense delineation between your space, your personal space, and of course this is really exemplified sort of most literally by the landscapes where you're shooting out from the inside of your car. So very much is actually your space and then the outer world space. But can you talk about that a little bit?
It's interesting. I sort of it's not something that I consciously think about when I'm shooting, but I do know what you're talking about. And I think that, I have this beautiful Baudrillard book called Cool Memories. And it has a Mizrak picture on the cover of the swimming pool. And I've always that book's been sitting around my life, somewhere out, for 20 years since I bought it. And there's something, and I always think of cool distance. And for me, there's something about when I was in graduate school was when that's when the German photography, it was very, very popular,
Dusseldorf.
Like the Dusseldorf, like Becher and Struve, Ruth, Gursky, Candida Hofer, and I'm sure there's other people I'm forgetting, but
that's a good list.
Yeah, but basically, there's a coolness to that observation, and I remember I had this. There was a photo editor from London that came to our school to do studio visits. And I remember he was like, why do you, these pictures are really amazing. I really like them. But it seems subjective, why don't you make them why can't, what if you make it more objective? And I was just thinking to myself, the German work, that's totally trending right now, that at that time, and or trendy, but or that was the movement of photography for sure. And and basically and I thought, no, and this is where it's interesting, where even though somebody that apparently might know better than you on some things, you realize that you know a lot yourself and you should trust yourself. And I remember thinking that just wasn't really sometimes I think back to that comment. It's well, what if I was susceptible to influence from too many people, and I would have gone a different direction, and I would have never become the photographer that I was.
No, because I'm so glad you didn't listen to that.
Me too. And it's funny how sometimes you just sort of know. And I think it's really important to I always try to enable my students, to trust themselves and to trust their decision making, because there's real value in that, when you can sort of say, okay, because this is something I learned from Larry Salton, the act of making art is the act of making many, many small decisions, and the whole time you're doing it, you're making a decision, every step of the way, there's a decision, is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Is it color? Is it black and white? Is it big? Is it small? Is it there's a million paths you can go down there. But if you you need to just make those decisions, and so it not be hindered by it. And so I think that, is it subjective? Is it objective? Do you make it dark, or do you make it normal? And so I think that those kind of decisions, and that's kind of what leads to what you're talking about, is this sort of there's a way that those pictures are I chose that subjective point of view where I kind of wanted to be in the picture a little bit. And so the pictures through the window of the car definitely exemplify that, I think, the most, because, it's my breath on the window, that made it a little foggy in there, or even I put water on there so it would splatter in the right way if it wasn't raining. And my hand was in that, and
I think it's in all your work, by the way. I mean, just I really feel, I thought about this a lot. Yes, it is the most obvious and sort of, as I said, literal with the cars. But I really feel that way with your houses. I still really feel you've staked out a position. And see, I think, and I think you know this, that your pictures are so cinematic. I mean, you are using the language of cinema in so many of your pictures. And so many of those houses shots to me are establishing shots, but they're not always, they're not objective establishing shots. They're often establishing shots as the main character, the protagonist, seeing something that they're about to go into. And so because they feel so much cinematic, subjective establishing shots.
Yes.
And maybe I'm just getting too kooky because film is I'm a film geek, but and I think it's why I love the work so much. I mean, I love the work because it's really great, but it speaks to me so intensely because it's a language that I really love.
And I agree with that 100%, that's part of that is definitely, that I do kind of think of myself. It's funny. I Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire.
Oh, I love that movie.
Was huge. I remember seeing that when when it had first come out, and
Bruno
when
Ganz.
I lived in Pier. Yeah, exactly. And then when the angels would fly from building to building, and they would go into other people's lives, and then they would drop out. I kind of like in a weird way think about that in the back of my head when I'm sequencing a book. I feel like you're sort of just going in and out of people's lives or like
Yep.
different scenarios or different homes. Like if a picture of a home it's like a neighborhood, when you have a group of them and you're sort of like looking at each different place, like from that kind of, you're there, but you're also from a distance a little bit. And so I do, think about that. And then it's weird that the cinematic thing is, I guess I got like, you wouldn't be appalled at how few films I've seen, like in terms of like the history of it, there's something that I somehow picked it up somewhere, but like I have that cinematic like approach, where I guess it's just something that I like, that there's like, it's kind of like a picture is like something is about to happen or has happened, or like, there's just something, there's something that's on the edge of something.
Yep.
And I like that, and I sort of like realized that, like a while ago when like a long time ago when I was like looking at my pictures, it's like, it feels like there's a moment that's like, about to occur. That's that slice of photography that it's funny how that works, how you just like, when you're interested in something, it just sort of replicates in your work. Whether you're taking pictures of, people, places, things, it's sort of like your view is like it's imposed on things.
I mean, the portraits, which we haven't talked about much and are a little bit more complicated for me, but the portraits also, of course, have some really wonderful cinematic qualities, and some of it really reminded me of Antonioni.
Yes, I love.
I
love his work. And
okay, so don't tell me you don't know film. For God's sake.
I know. I haven't seen all of his movies.
Well, you don't have to see all of his movies, first of all, because some of them are like literally incoherent. But of course,
I've seen a few. Yes, I've seen that. And
I see that in some of the portraits.
I'm definitely very influenced by that. There's just something about that. I feel bad not knowing the names of the movies, but like. There's
Ventura,
it was lot of Ventura. Yeah, like just the sort of like just the nature of it's so interesting. The is it Monica Bellucci? Is that her name?
Monica Vitti.
Monica Vitti. Of course, yeah. Monica Bellucci is like somebody different like now, but Monica Vitti, she is unbeliverable.
She was his muse. I mean, she's the star of all three of those films, and you have sort of a muse, so there's that overlap also.
Yeah, and like, but I've screenshotted like things from there, just sort of like just to sort of study. To study that, because and she's an incredible actress.
Amazing,
just incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, that was just hugely influential to me as well. Just anyway, we could go down that path. But so let me just ask you about the portraits, because, one thing I was thinking about with them is, I know. You and I have had a little bit of back and forth, and I've listened to other interviews you've given, and I sort of have the sense of you as being a pretty warm and generous person, certainly a very generous teacher. And I'm sort of interested in this idea. It's not just with you, but with artists in general. But I wonder, since I'm talking to you, if we could talk about it a little bit, which is, someone's sort of public political position, and let's say what I'm talking about specifically here is women's equality, general sort of feminism in the broadest sense of the word.
Yeah.
And then, which I assume you probably believe in.
Of course, absolutely.
And then the portraits of the women, I find personally somewhat reductive, where the women, the pictures are really beautiful, but not necessarily, a full three-dimensional look at the life of women. It's very, very much a specific, very sexualized, or I would say sort of the archetypes, like the siren, the sort of strong but fragile woman, the sort of cornered woman, the sort of mysterious, these certain sort of types, tropes that...
Yeah, I understand, definitely.
So I guess I'm curious, how does an artist like you reconcile your sort of political beliefs with creating a body of work that maybe doesn't and you probably don't even agree with this, but to me doesn't really line up with that more political.
Yeah, well, I would say that, well, one, like the meaning of an artwork always resides in the viewer. And I think that people I think that everybody sees things in different ways. And then I guess I don't see my images like not lining up with my generally, like you mentioned, like, I'm a generous, kind-hearted person, and I definitely don't have. I'm not like I'm never. My work has never been. I've never intended on making anybody feel bad or I said reductive is what you said. But well, firstly, all photography is reductive. Of course, there's some pictures that are more reductive than others, perhaps. But I think that like it's interesting how we talk like going back to Joan Didion. Like what we talked about, or like that thing. I remember my creative writing teacher said, write what you know.
Yep.
And that's what you do. And so sort of like, and then looking back at like, we were talking about like, my work very much stems from a difficult childhood. And I think that way back when with the art therapist, I realized that like, I was definitely working with issues of, he's kind of like, well, you drive around at night and you take pictures of houses and you have a whole bunch of them. That's not like an accident. It's something that
right.
like you're ruminating or you're going over or you're milling over something that you're trying to work out,
Yep.
And I very much think that photography can be that. And I think that, coming from the way that I grew up, there were definitely some things that needed to be worked out, and like everybody else, but like, we all have our own things, but what's curious about the portraits for me is like, and I don't think, it's funny because people always don't really know how somebody works. They don't know what the process is like unless, you tell them. But like the portraits that I've done for the most part, have been very collaborative. The people that I work with, definitely have agency in making them. And you had mentioned like, there was somebody that I worked with a lot named Christina,
right.
who's somebody that I've worked with for like, it's been like 14 years now.
Oh,
and
that's amazing.
And that's a long time. And like,
that is a long time.
And we've made like a lot of images. And then, she's a professional model and she lives in New York and, she's very like popular and well known. She's even on TV commercials right now. I saw her, and she's very successful. And she said to me, she always says like it's like when she comes back to San Francisco, like we work together, and she always says it's like like I love working with you because you're the only person that actually lets me be me. I'm always pretending to be this or that for these different things, but like when I work with you, that I just I feel like you're capturing something that's me and that I want to like, and the thing that's interesting is like, we never have like a plan of like, what are we going to do? We always just sort of like, we'll get together and we've, photographed like, 20 times, which is a lot. It's even more than that, I'm sure. But we always like, we don't talk about what we're going to do. We just sort of do it. And then, in a lot of ways that I think that like, my work with the portraits, and with Christina in particular, but definitely with other people I've worked with is there's something, we're both coming to this point to take some pictures and there's a reason that we're doing it. And it's because we're sort of ruminating over or working out or whatever.
Yeah, working out. That's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
And it's very much like that. And I think that, like one person might see something as reductive and another person sees it as liberating. But I understand what you're talking about. And like, and I've thought long and hard about that, and then I guess like to answer your question, like, back to those rules for artists and students, there's like analyzing your, and making our different processes,
yep.
And you just sort of like making the work and then like and deciding what to put out, that's where the analyzation comes in. And, I've definitely I've worked through like the things that I've needed to work through a lot in my life, and that, because a lot of that stuff is like, 10 or 15 years old. And as you grow as an artist, you also change as an artist. And like, it's very interesting how like my work with Christina has, it not changed, but it's just, and it's like anybody, hopefully we're all evolving and we're growing. And then your images change in that way too. So anyhow, that's sort of how I feel about that. But like, I also think that the politics, your personal politics, are very, very important, but also like sometimes there's your artwork just has to be made.
I mean, I think that's, you're being true to yourself, and that's the life of an artist, hopefully.
You're like, hopefully that is like, that's the goal.
Well, because I have a under 1 hour rule,
Yes.
I hope to leave them wanting more. But for now, I want to thank you for being on the podcast and so generous with your thoughts and with your wonderful advice.
You're very welcome, and thank you for providing like the space to connect to people in, because it's funny how it's not funny, it's terrible that I used to go to 20 different art events like a year. I haven't been to any of them this year because I was
I know.
I was shooting in February in France, and then I came home and then it was lockdown, I haven't really gone anywhere at all, and so these things are really important right now.
They are.
Because to be able to talk to people and connect to people and our community is such a rich and beautiful community. And so, in my opinion. It is. Oh, I agree with that completely. I feel so lucky that we have this. In fact, photo community is amazing.
Let me just throw this in as the ending here to our show, is that I think you think we've never met, but we actually met. See, you were famous and I wasn't, and I'm still not.
I remember meeting you in Arles.
We met
right?
at Look 3.
Oh, Look, yes.
I actually think when you met Denise is when I met you.
Yeah, I think so too. I guess I remember I met Denise there.
But it's such a great, that I think of that now, and I'm bringing it up because wasn't that Look 3 was like summer camp, wasn't it?
Oh, that was wonderful. I love that. It was such an amazing, and I've only been to that one, but I loved it because it was, I got to meet people and I remember meeting you. There were so many different people there, and it was great. It was incredible people.
Everywhere you turned, it was some fantastic person in our wonderful world, our fantastic pond of photographers and photo adjacent people like me who do what I do, and just what a fun thing. But there are a lot of wonderful festivals. Look 3 doesn't happen anymore, but there are still a lot of other things, and I feel blessed, and they will come back, and we'll all be hanging out once again, hopefully in the near future.
I'm so looking forward to that. It's so important to do that. And
until then, we'll just record these podcasts.
Exactly.
But okay.
Exactly.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And be well, stay safe.
Okay,
and,
you too. And enjoy your guitar playing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Right. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The associate producer is Taylor Selsback, and the executive producer is Sasha Wolf. Our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and rate us with all the stars available on your listening platform.